Good morning, Warzone kids. I was thinking this morning about experts in healing. Warzone kids is my term for those of us like myself. I'm a child sex abuse survivor. As an adult, I live with borderline personality disorder. I'm a recovering addict and bulimic. And I think of our childhoods, those of us that can relate to anything like that, as being a hostile war zone against our psyche, our self, who we are, and less like a supportive nursery where you can grow a hothouse orchid. That's just my term for a war zone kid. May have been sexual abuse, physical abuse, psychological abuse, emotional abuse. I had most of that. Not a lot of physical abuse in my particular story. It might be societal abuse, racial abuse, or gender-related abuse, or harm. You can substitute the word harm. And I think of our psyche as a Jenga tower. You know that game that you play with the big old block of wood that's made up of smaller blocks? Every turn that comes along, you slide out one of those smaller blocks and put it up on top. The game ends when the tower falls down. Every game ends the same way. Well, all the harm, abuse, and neglect that we Warzone kids experience in childhood, every little piece of that is like one of those blocks taken out of your Jenga block and put up on top. Every turn in the game, the tower gets a little taller, a little more rickety, a little less stable. And the game ends when the tower falls down. Every end is a beginning. So the end of your Jenga tower as a Warzone kid is the beginning of the part of your life where you can put that Jenga tower back together again and make it a little bit more stable. You can put them pieces back where they belong. That's what I think of as healing, and I call that, for myself, I call that the Western lands, the land of peace and wholeness where I learn and become what I am. And I think of myself as a pilgrim on the trail to the Western lands. A pilgrimage is an act of devotion where the journey itself is almost indistinguishable from the destination. But like I said when I started this off, I was thinking about experts. It came to me the other day that there are some questions people had around like what I do. I'm a volunteer circle keeper for an organization called Hidden Water. It facilitates healing circles run by and for those affected by child sex abuse. The circles last 12 weeks. I'm a volunteer circle keeper. That means I'm a participant in the circle. And, you know, what I do as a circle keeper is basically like, you know, I help start the Zoom meeting. There's a chat box. And we have kind of a trajectory that we follow. We build a secure perimeter for each other so we can share our experience. And then there's usually 8 of us, and we'll spend 8 weeks, each of us sharing our story, and the rest of us listening to understand that story, and then sharing to be understood in what that story meant for us and how we relate to it. And my experience in these circles is that I see myself reflected back in each one of the Zoom boxes around the little Brady Bunch screen of our circle. We do this over Zoom. And I believe that each one of the other participants can see some of themselves in me. And before the first healing circle I did, I asked the person that we do a welcome call where we kind of explain all this to the participants. And I asked the circle keeper who called me. She went over the curriculum, the trajectory, how it works. And I said, that's all well and good, but where's the healing happen? And she laughed and said, well, that is a good question. And all I can really say is you ought to show up and try it out for yourself. And I did. And I'll tell you the truth, boys and girls, I found it very difficult not to bail out. Because I was aggravated by everything. Everyone annoyed me. Everyone got on my nerves. But I was at a stage in my life where I was lost in the sea of suffering, bobbing around in an ocean of pain and suffering. And I'd have done anything. Any medicine anyone give me, I'd have drunk it. I don't care if it's snake oil or not. Anything anyone told me I could do might make me feel better, I'd do it. So I did it. I kept coming back. And that was a few years ago, and I've been doing my best. We do 2 circles a year, and each and every one of them brings me closer to the Western lands. And so when I heard a question come up around like, where's the evidence for this? Where's the experts that'll tell us if this is a good idea and does it work or not? You know, well, that got on my nerves. I'm an irascible guy. I'm an ornery guy. And I studied philosophy in college, so there's some questions that come to my mind when I heard that. Experts in what? Experts in what exactly? Experts in what? Being a human being? Being a child sex abuse survivor? Experts in that? Experts in psychology? What does the word expert mean? The word expert has to mean something. Like you got a high level of knowledge and skill at something. If you're an expert carpenter, you can teach other people how to be a carpenter. You can supervise their work. You have technical skills. You can pass them off. You can take the younger generation of carpenters and you can tell them, here's how you make a house level, plumb, and square, all 3 at the same time. I can sometimes manage 1 out of 3. But if you want all 3 at the same time, you need to go talk to someone else, because I'm not an expert. Is the psychology of being a child sex abuse survivor something you could be an expert at? Can you pass that knowledge on to the next generation of child sex abuse survivors? Well, I'll tell you this. I'll tell you that nobody sat me down and said, here's how you make your psyche level, plumb, and square. Here's how you make your Jenga tower level, plumb, and square. You do these 3 things and it'll be there. Carpenter can't really do that either. You can't read in a book how to make a house level, plumb, and square. You have to do it. You have to build a house and see that it ain't level, plumb, or square. You have to do that over and over again. You can read about how to drive a nail. You want to drive a nail? Pick up a handful of them, get you a hammer and a board, and drive some nails. A couple hours later, you'll be better than you were when you started. That's your path to being an expert carpenter. You can't read about it in a book. And if you never pick up a hammer and nails, you ain't never going to be even an apprentice carpenter. You're never even going to begin the journey, let alone arrive at the end point where you're a master carpenter and can pass on the trade. Being a human being ain't something you can learn about from a book. Being an expert at being a human being ain't something you can read about. It's something you have to do. And when I had that welcome call from Hidden Water, basically what the circle keeper told me was the equivalent of saying, when you build a house, it needs to be level, plumb, and square. And if you show up to this circle, I'm going to give you a handful of nails and a hammer and a board. Do with them what you will. Do with them what you will. If you want to be an expert carpenter, you got to take that handful of nails, you got to put it in your pouch, you got to get your hammer, you got to get your board, and you got to start bending nails. Then you got to turn your hammer around, get that claw, you got to try to pull them back out. You do that a few thousand times, and you'll get to where you're pretty handy at it. I could go to the Hidden Water website, I'll put it in the description. You could go to the Hidden Water website, and you could read it every day of the week and twice on Sundays. And that'll do you about as much good as learning that in order to make a solid house, it needs to be level, plumb, and square. It'll be helpful. At least you know it needs to be level, plumb, and square. And what I'm telling you is that you can get your Jenga tower in a lot better shape than it is without trying. My Jenga tower is in much better shape than it was when I showed up my first circle. I'm concerned about living my life right now. I'm a runner, I'm a writer. I've put something like 30 or 40 hours worth of these videos up on YouTube and TikTok. I'm a performer. I've done a one-man show in Los Angeles at the 2025 Hollywood Fringe Festival last year. You can see it on my website. Those are all things that I did not do before I commenced picking my Jenga tower pieces up off the floor and putting them back together. I did not do those things before I had that call with the circle keeper at Hidden Water, who explained to me that if I wanted to build a house, I had to make it level, plumb, and square. And step one in doing that was to get a handful of nails and a hammer and a board and start banging them in. So when I hear about experts in healing, I say, that's amazing. I do not care one bit what letters you got after your name. I do not care what research projects you did using rat brains and MRIs. These things are all amazing. I love science. I'm a cerebral guy. If you take this and say it's an anti-science, anti-evidence proclamation, that would be wrong. But I live in the here and now. And I know that slicing and dicing human brains and sticking them in PET scanners and MRI scanners and studying how rats like rat cookies and studying what college freshmen do when they participate in your experiment are very helpful things. They can do a lot toward helping folks understand many elements of our lives. None of it is the same as living your one single human life. And none of that reading about how you need a house to be level, plumb, and square, and what makes rats eat rat cookies, and how people respond to psilocybin, and whether talk therapy or EMD or behavioral therapy or cognitive behavioral therapy or electromagnetic therapy or shock therapy or insulin therapy or anything else under the sun. None of that is anything more than reading about how a house is better if it's level, plumb, and square. And none of that helps you build a house that's level, plumb, and square, Pilgrim. And you live in a house. You live in a Jenga tower. That's what we do. We live in a house. We live in a Jenga tower. And the more level, plumb, and square our Jenga tower is, the better off we are. And the more I'm able to concentrate on my own life. I'm running in a half marathon here in a couple months. And trying to get this book I'm working on published. Right? For that, I needed someone to give me a handful of nails and a hammer and a board and say, get to it, tough guy. Get to it. Take them nails, use that hammer, use the blunt end, and bang those nails into that board. That's what happened in that healing circle. I didn't know which end of the nail went in the board. I didn't know which end of the hammer went in my hand. I didn't know what to do with that board except probably step on it and hit myself in the face like in Three Stooges. In order to make a house level, plumb, and square, you got to build it. In order to build a house, you got to learn from an expert. What that expert's going to do is show you how to use a hammer and nails and a board to get started. It's something that you learn by doing. You become an expert carpenter by being a poor carpenter. You become a poor carpenter by willing to be bad at something, by being willing to try, by being willing to show up to your life. And it don't matter if the nail's upside down and you try to hit it with the hammer and with the hammer of the hammer, and you don't know how to use the board. You try to hammer your nails into the end of the board, right? That's what I think about experts. There are indeed experts in the human psyche. We have a special name for those experts. They're called human beings. They're called your fellow human creatures. I was handed a hammer and nails and a board by that circle keeper. And I'll be grateful to her every day of my life for that. No matter how crooked my nails are, no matter how hard it is for me to nail them in, no matter whether I can ever get in that nail in 6 licks with a big heavy framing hammer, I'll be grateful to that circle keeper the rest of my life, because she gave me a handful of nails and a hammer and a board and showed me how she did it. And I show up to circles whenever I can, because every time I get a little bit better at building my own life level, plumb, and square, and every circle I show up at, there's a shot that something I say or do might help put some nails and a hammer and a board in someone else's hand. Because that's all you can do. No one else can build my house for me. They can't live in it, they can't build it. That's for me to do. That's what I think about experts in healing. There are experts in healing, and they're called human beings, and they're people just like you and just like me. And I'm very grateful for everyone that slices up rat brains and puts them in an MRI. I'm very grateful for it. I hope they keep on doing it. And when they're doing that work, when those scientists are doing that science, that sciencey work, they are human beings engaged in a project of learning about how the psyche works, about how our brains work, and that's very helpful. However, when those same scientists, who might be themselves child sex abuse survivors, when those same scientists get to work building their own houses, and they want their own house to be level, plumb, and square, you can't learn that from a rat brain. They got to learn that from experts. They got to learn their trade at being a human being from experts in being a human being, from the inside. We run our soul. I run my soul from the inside of my eyeballs, not the outside. And you can take the brain out of my head and slice it and dice it all day and night, put it in MRIs and PET scanners and whatever else you want. And I hope you learned something if you do that, but I hope you let me get done with my brain before you take it out. That's a different thing, Pilgrim, than living on the inside of your eyeballs in the house that you got to build while you make it level, plumb, and square. We are human beings. I am a human being with a soul. I'm a male Homo sapiens. I'm a man. You are whatever you are. You may be a man, a woman. You may be a child. You may be a boy or a girl. You may be non-binary. You may be transgender. You may be whatever it is that you are. That's what you are. And I love you for it. We got to live our life, Pilgrim. We have to live our life from the inside. So today, we can get a lot of miles on the trail to the Western Lands. Rosy Fingered Dawn is gorgeous. She is out, she is wide awake. The sky is blue and orange and pink and violet. And there's puffy gray clouds. And the roads are dry. It's cold out here in Vermont. It's 13 degrees. But we can get in today's miles, Pilgrim. We can get them together. Why don't we take a break for a minute and get us a handful of nails out of our pouch, and get a hammer, and get a board, and write a little note to other pilgrims on the trail, and tell them, this way to the Western Lands. Walk this way. Walk in your life. Be a human being. And then you take that note, and you put that note on the board, and you take one of them nails out of your pouch, and you take that hammer, and you use the skills you've learned as a human being to bang that nail into that board and then stick that board in the ground and leave it for others, because someone else you know might see it, and they might look around for some nails and a hammer, and they might start on their own trail to the Western Lands, Pilgrim. It's a beautiful day. Daylight's burning, Pilgrim. Let's get after it.